Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. This is week 3 of the Indiana General Assembly, just completed. And I wanted to update you on some things that happened this week, not all of which are AFA issues, but I want to touch on two first before I get to those that do affect us. The first one's Senate Bill 11. I've mentioned this bill before, and the more I look at the bill, the more I like it, the more important I think it is. Senate Bill 11 is a bill that would require or allow as a tool for parents to use to require parental consent for social media use for minor children. And given all the dangers that we know are out there on the internet and that kids get into accidentally or even intentionally, that can cause mental health problems, pornographic issues, other things. Heavy use of social media affects kids, particularly girls' mental health, but it affects boys as well too. And so this is simply a tool for parents that they can use to require them to give consent so they know what social media apps their young children are using. It's not required that parents use it that I know of, but it is required to have those social media sites have that option or have that requirement for parents to use if they so choose. So I think that's a good bill. Senate Bill 11, Mike Bohacek has authored that bill. That bill is up today for third reading, which is the final vote. So we will see today on Thursday, as I record this, if they vote on it today or if they hold it till next week. Another bill that we've talked about a lot is Senate Bill 143. This is the parental rights bill, and there's been a lot of discussion about this. I wanted to let you know where this is in the process. It's on second reading. Now, first reading is a committee hearing. We've gone through that process with this bill on Senate Bill 11. Second reading is the amendment process. Third reading is final vote. And it's very rare. You have to have a supermajority, I think, to amend a bill on third reading. They'll usually call it back to second if they need to amend it, but it doesn't happen very often. On second reading is when anybody can put up an amendment. There have been 3 amendments filed on Senate Bill 143 on parental rights. One of them is a very hostile amendment by a Democrat author that would delete the last section of the bill, which would essentially, without that section in the bill, it would give a child rights to supersede their parents on things like, I can see how this would play out very easily, on transgender surgeries, puberty blockers, things like that. And so the left doesn't like parental rights on certain things that they want kids to do or be able to do, which even though we have a state law prohibiting that, they're trying to get around that. So gutting that last section would be very detrimental to the bill. I don't think that will happen. We'll see. I think the Republicans will hold tight on this bill. And I think we're going to also see some Democrats who vote for the bill, as we had a strong vote in committee where that passed out 9-2 with 2 Democrat votes in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Another amendment that will be offered to that is from the author to change a couple things that were inserted in the committee. She's taking it back to more the original version, which is a little stronger, and she's adding something in there concerning social work liability. That's not really a big deal. So we'll see if that bill moves on to third reading for final vote next week. If they amend it today, they will. If not, they'll do it Monday or Tuesday. They're not under a deadline. It's very early in the session. So when something sits on the calendar for a few days, it's not something to be concerned about. But we'll watch and see what happens with Senate Bill 143 on parental rights, which is a very important bill for parents. Now, the other bill I want to talk about, and this is not an issue that I testified on. I did watch the hearing. The hearing lasted for 5 hours yesterday. It was very long, very contentious on 2 bills in particular. I'm going to mention one of them. Both of them dealt with diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI. Many of you have heard about that. It's a theory that's very controversial. But the major bill on that, the first bill, and it didn't bring the number, but maybe I'll bring that next week or mention it, requires schools to simply inform parents of what DEI training is being done for staff. But the second bill, Senate Bill 235 by Senator Tyler Johnson, concerns limiting diversity, education, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion training in state governments and colleges and state institutions as well. As you can imagine, the left didn't like this. There was a lot of opposition to it in testimony, but there was also some very interesting and very good testimony from doctors who are concerned about what DEI is doing to medical training and medical schools and lowering some standards to kind of make things more inclusive, which inclusion's not a bad thing in and of itself, but when you're talking about a doctor, you want the highest standard possible, regardless of race or anything like that, because we're dealing with people's lives. You want the best and the brightest. I'm not saying that minorities are not bright. I mean, lots and lots of doctors are in a minority class, female or Middle Eastern or Indian or whatever. That's wonderful, that's fine. But there's concerns that DEI is lowering standards in medical schools. And there's some very good but concerning testimony about how DEI has done some potentially negative things in medical schools. The bill was passed out of committee on a party line vote. I believe it was 8-2 or 8-3 possibly. But it's moving on to second reading. One of the things I observed in this hearing, and I'm very sympathetic to some of the things the Democrats raised. Obviously, there's hurts there from our past history of racism in America, which we've largely corrected. Sometimes you listen to these people talk, and it kind of sounds like we're back in the 1800s when we're not. Could more progress be made? Absolutely. But the sinful nature of man will never eliminate racism, unfortunately. And I'm not sure DEI has done anything to make that better. But there was an analogy used by a legislator, a Democrat legislator who I don't agree with. I don't dislike anybody in the legislature. I think most people have good intentions. But there's a clash of worldviews on a lot of things, and we saw that yesterday in this lengthy hearing. And I'm just going to say this, but he brought up that he was not only a legislator and attorney, but also a DEI instructor, which surprised some on the committee. Someone joked maybe you should recuse yourself from this vote, which he kind of smiled at. But he gave an analogy that he uses in DEI instruction, asking kids about building a building for elephants and giraffes. How do you build a building for an elephant and a giraffe? And he said, you make a big building with a very large door and a very wide door. And he said, that's inclusion. But I think in that analogy, I understand what he's saying. I think in that analogy, the difference there is striking, because I think he sees differences in race as an elephant and a giraffe, whereas I would see differences in race as more like a crocodile and alligator, very minor. But DEI, I think, focuses on these differences and makes them very major, and that's why I think this is so divisive. I don't see differences between race, nor do I think we should, and I don't think Martin Luther King wanted us to do that. And I think sometimes when he's quoted, some people get upset who support DEI because they don't want to like what he said on that, so they point to other things. But working towards a colorblind society, still addressing problems that we've had is not a problem, not an issue, but making a huge difference out of things that really shouldn't be different, especially as a Christian. I'll say this. We were born from Adam and Eve, one race, one blood. I think some of these programs really cause problems because I think they make the divide wider, and that's not where we should be going. Those benign things should be benign things, not major things that divide us. And I think many people believe DEI instruction is very divisive. It's often used as a way to shut down debate. You label someone as a racist when they're not. I think some of these things that happen from DEI are disturbing. Now, you may not agree with me, you may support it, you may not, but I want to at least let you know what your legislature is dealing with in some of the hot issues. Like I said, it's not an issue I testified on. It was an interest. I watched the bill. I think it's a good bill. I think it's an important step forward. It fits with what the governor just did this week with an executive order attempting to remove DEI instruction and not forcing state employees to go through DEI instruction, which many would believe is maybe a liberal indoctrination program. And so I know many of you are concerned about that. If you are, take a look at Senate Bill 235. You can look it up on the Indiana General Assembly website. Make a decision for yourself. But I want to let you know that bill's gotten a lot of attention in the media, and certainly took a lot of attention with 4 hours of testimony and debate over that, and it was very contentious, but the legislature is moving that bill forward. and we'll see what the Senate does with that. It will probably get a lot of media attention, but I would encourage you, first and foremost, if you're interested in that, look at this bill and decide for yourself, because oftentimes what comes out in media stories is more of the sensational, emotional stories, whereas it's much better to look at what the law says or what the proposed law says. So I hope that makes sense. There are other issues in their House we're looking at. Not as many things have come up in the House of interest to me. I will say in the committee hearing yesterday in the Senate, though, there was an interesting bill. Again, not something I testified on, but may interest you as a listener, is that a bill, and I didn't bring the number, but you can look it up, on squatting. You say, what in the world is squatting? This is a landlord-tenant issue. And the concern is you have people who break into a home for a landlord, move in for weeks or months, and it's very hard to evict them. There's also a situation growing in a lot of states, possibly Indiana, where you have bad actors, where somebody like yourself may go to Florida for 3 months, and a third party will come in, find out your home is empty, create a fake lease agreement, and release it out to somebody. You come back, there's somebody living in your home for 3 months who thinks it's an Airbnb or something like that. And so what this bill says is that it helps a landlord or a property owner evict somebody who doesn't have a legal interest in that property. And I wrote about that a little bit, how the Bible was, I think, misused this week in a rally against that bill by homeless advocates. That may leave you scratching your head, but it's a very interesting discussion about things that we have as problems in our society, where I do agree, if you come at this from a biblical angle, we're called by the Bible to care for the widows, orphans, to shelter people in need. But there's a big difference between expanding homeless centers or bringing someone into your home or your church who needs shelter and breaking into somebody's home in a house that you don't own and living there. So that's and you'd be surprised at the opposition to that bill that came up and some of the arguments that came up. It was really kind of a negative view of landlords. Now, I get some people may be mistreated, but when you're talking about public law, you need to look at the greater good and the big picture. So I do think if a person owns their property, nobody has a right to break into their home and live in their home or live in their rental unit. So that's just my 2 cents. You can look that up online. But that's another bill moving through that's gained some media attention because of some of the activism against that bill. I think the Senate's going to fly that thing through. I think it'll pass easily and probably move through the House. But strange things happen in the legislature, strange arguments you hear. That's why it's so important to have a strong conservative biblical worldview to see clearly when these issues come up. And that's certainly what I hope to do. And you can pray for me in that regard for my wisdom as we look at hundreds of bills that potentially could see action out of the nearly 2,000 that have been filed for this session. So hope that's helpful. Hopefully we'll see some more issues next week and the weeks ahead about issues that I deal more with directly at AFA. Now, the crossover date when Senate bills that are acted on go to the House and vice versa is February 20th. That'll kind of give you an idea. We have committee hearings up to close to that date. So there's a lot of work yet to be done for almost a month on various issues that could come up. So when you look at the bill in the General Assembly website, you see a bill you like, it's still alive till about the February 18th. So just keep that in mind. If you want to call your legislator about a bill you like or don't like, please feel free to do that. We'll have information about how you can contact your legislator down below. But I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for your support of the American Family Association of Indiana.